the punishment that the pharaohs give to the Jews in Egypt. He told them to throw all their males into the Nile and save all the women, which in essence it was supposed to be Abraham should have been sacrificed himself instead of pushing Sarah to sacrifice herself to spare his life.
So basically, Nachmanides says the fact, what you're saying is, I didn't get a chance to look it up, but Eyal, I really like when there's a question and you guys do the research yourself. It's pretty amazing. Eyal's saying that Abraham should not have done what he did. He should have let himself be at risk for being killed, maybe even sacrifice his life, instead of having his wife go through what she went through. And because of the wrong thing, and Nachmanides says it was actually wrong of Abraham, because of that, the punishment later on will be the Jews will have to suffer as a consequence later on in history that the males will be thrown into the Nile River. Okay, go ahead, Eyal.
And Rashi says exactly the opposite. So Rashi says that Abraham did the right thing, and he should have done what he did because, first of all, the dispute starts that he shouldn't have even went to Egypt because God told him to go to the land of Israel, and just because of the famine over there, he should not went to Egypt. He should have trusted God to provide for it.
So you're saying Nachmanides is adding another wrong thing that Abraham did. What should he have done? He should have suffered it out, lived in Israel where the hunger was, and managed somehow, and not gone to Egypt, which then brought about all the other problems because he ended up going to Egypt. Okay.
And Rashi says, no, Rashi says Abraham knew about the Egyptians, that they were corrupt people, and he says that they were ugly inside and outside. So they were really bad people. And he wanted there to confront them and therefore try to sway them to the ways of God. However, when he sent Sarah, when Pharaoh took Sarah, then all the Egyptians got plagued. He brings his side saying that when the Jews were slaves to pharaohs in Egypt, they stayed Jews just because of that act. They would not convert, and it's very easy for a suppressed a nation to convert and assimilate.
So what gave the Jews the courage and the faith and the determination later on in Egypt was the fact that Abraham already encountered Egypt and dealt with it successfully and overcame the challenge. That gave the Jews later on the conviction and the determination to overcome the challenge later on. Right?
Yes.
Good, good. I just want to move along. Excellent. Yeah, let's move. Yeah, let's move on because it's already 2:10. But I really appreciate that. Thank you, Eyal. Is that good, or you think we need to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay, beautiful. Very, very good. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you very, very much. Okay, let's move along to today's Chumash. So, as I said, Abraham took his nephew Lot, whose father was killed in the fire. He took his nephew Lot with him, so they kind of adopted the nephew, Abraham's nephew Lot, his brother's son. And Lot, now we learned that when Abraham left Egypt, he became very rich because after they stole his wife, they took his wife forcibly to marry the king of Egypt, and the king found out that she was married to him and she was such a holy person that God was punishing the king for taking this woman. He said, Abraham, I wish you would have told me. Why didn't you tell me it was your wife really? Here's a lot of money. And they already gave him actually a lot of money before. As soon as he became they thought he was going to become the brother-in-law of the king of Egypt, to get out of my country. But as he leaves, he's now very wealthy from all the money that he was given by the Egyptians. But not just is he wealthy, his nephew becomes very wealthy too. So V'gam Lot, verse 5, Avram, Lot that was hanging out and living with Abraham and left Egypt and Israel and their possessions, I guess, kept on growing and growing from all the money that they had. He had sheep and cattle and tents, and Abraham became extremely wealthy, very, very rich. So here you have the father of the Jewish people becoming rich, but not just Abraham, even his nephew Lot. And Rashi says, why did Lot become financially successful? Because of his uncle. Because since he was hanging out with Avram, and Avram, I guess, was a great businessman and also blessed by Hashem and so on. So the blessing, flowed on also to his nephew Lot. However, a challenge is going to come, and this is where challenges in life come. What happens when you have two very wealthy people? It could be a challenge for them to live next to each other. There are different challenges that come up when two people have a lot of possessions. In those days, it was animals and cattle. Tremendously wealthy, these two people. So much so, verse 6 says, that the land couldn't hold the amount of cattle and sheep. For them to live together. And now all of a sudden, see what's going on. It sounds like a real life situation like we have today. There's going to be a family feud. Both of them are becoming very powerful. Empires are growing. The cattle and their finances are growing. And there wasn't enough land to hold their cattle. Because they had so much possessions, they couldn't live together. Now, basically, Rashi explains that the animals need to eat, and they eat grass and whatever they eat, and being that Hashem blessed them so much, there wasn't enough land for the animals to eat. So verse 7. So what happened? So a fight breaks out. And a fight breaks out between the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot. Now maybe Abraham and Lot themselves are not fighting, they're friends, but it's happening from the ground up. Right? You think about political parties today. The constituents, they're fighting. Maybe the people, I'm thinking like in politicians today, maybe the two governors or two senators, congressmen know to get along, but the people in that community are breaking out a fight. Now in that time, and Rashi is going to explain to us what's going on here, the Canaanites, who remember we were learning about in the previous Chumash, that the Canaanites were conquering the land. As Abraham was coming to Israel as a test, kind of to him. The Canaanites were conquering Israel. Abraham's coming in and he sees the Canaanites are conquering Israel, which is a different family than Abraham, and also the Perizzites. As were living in the land. So you had two people living in the land at the time. So they were living in not their own land. So what was the fight? Rashi tells us, what was the major family fight here between the two tribes? What was the fight between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot? Avram and his nephew. And this is very interesting. He says that Lot, Abraham had no children. Remember, he was already 75 years old. And he had no children. And he adopted Lot. So Lot assumed that he was going to be the offspring of Abraham. So Lot already assumed he was going to be the offspring of Abraham. He's going to get all the money, all of Abraham, not just his own wealth, but when his uncle passes away, it's going to go all to the nephew. It's going to go all to Lot. Now, what did God promise Abraham in the previous Chumash that we learned? That he's going to give Abraham Israel. Where are they living now? They're living in Israel. It's Canaan now, but it's going to be Israel. So, you know what Lot said? I own this country already. This is mine. Abraham has no kids. I'm going to inherit my uncle. All of it's mine. The whole land, everything that's going to be here is going to be mine. And therefore, even though the Canaanites and the Perizzites live here now, and God hasn't given it to Abraham even yet, even Abraham hasn't received it yet, his children, his descendants haven't received it, but I know it's going to be mine, and therefore it's mine already now. So what did he do? He let his animals start pasturing in all kinds of fields. You could go wherever you want. What do you mean someone else owns land? Nobody owns land. This land is promised by God to my uncle Abraham, who I'm going to inherit, and therefore I get all the possessions that I want. So it belongs to me. I can eat your backyard and your farm. It's all mine. So it doesn't belong to anybody else. But the shepherds of Abraham were God-fearing people. Abraham taught them the right way. So they said, what are you kidding? This doesn't belong to you now. It belongs to the Canaanites and the Perizzites now. God promised Abraham he will give it to him, but it's stealing now if you go to somebody's backyard or somebody's farm and start taking their produce. So that's the fight. So it's a cultural fight. They're very different, the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot, and they're getting into a fight. So this is part of the quarreling. This was one of the major fights that were going on at the time. So what do you do in a fight? And I think this is a very good lesson we're about to learn. Sometimes for family, it's good that they shouldn't be on each other's necks the whole time. Sometimes the best thing, when the families are so different, when you have family and the brothers and the sisters and maybe the cousins are so different than each other, it might be good that they shouldn't live on top of each other's necks. You know what I mean? I guess today, one's Republican, one's Democrat, and they're killing each other and they're fighting. It might be good that, if you really can't live together at some point, maybe you shouldn't don't talk about this topic. Just don't bring it up. We're not talking about politics here. This is where we're not getting along, or other cultural differences that there are. So you should still care and love each other, but it might not always be good to live on top of each other's necks. Sometimes it's good. You have a brother who you really like. You live in one town, I live in the next town. This way we'll have actually better peace between us. This is what happens here. So the uncle Avram tells his nephew Lot, there shouldn't be a fight between me and you. This is going to make a big family fight here. between my shepherds and your shepherds. We're kinsmen, we're brothers, we're relatives, we're family. This looks really bad, Avram tells his nephew. And not just Rashi tells us they looked alike. You could see they're family. They both look similar. Their faces resembled each other. He says, look, we're family over here. Look what's going on. This is what I think we should do, Abraham tells his nephew. The whole land is in front of you. He parted Nami Alai. You move a little away from me. You go left, I go right. And if I go right, and if you go right, I'll go left. So it sounds like almost political parties. You want to be right, you'll be right, I be left. You be left, I be no. He's talking about a land here, right? You go to one side, I go to the other side. And I'm not going to Rashi tells the uncle tells his nephew, I'm not going to go far. I'm going to be there always for you. Whenever you need me, I'm going to be there. It just happens to be that I'm not going to be there. I'm just, on a day-to-day life, we're going to separate from each other. Our animals are getting in, it's getting competitive. We're not doing well together. But so we're going to move apart from each other. But we're going to be there for each other as soon as each other's needs. And Rashi says that actually happened. We'll see a story soon that Lot is taken captive, and Avram right away runs to save his nephew's life. So Lot lifts his eyes, as Einav, he lifts up his eyes to look around. He sees the whole Jordan plain, the whole plains of the Jordan, that it was a beautiful land. He says, Kikula Mashka, there was, Rashi says, lands with streams of water there. I think today that's where, I looked online a little bit, but that's where like the Dead Sea is, like in that area somewhere there. Before it was the Dead Sea, before Hashem destroyed Sodom and Amorah, beforehand it was probably the best land. Kigan Hashem, it was like the garden of God. The trees, Rashi says, gorgeous trees were growing there. There was the garden of Hashem, Ke'eretz Mitzrayim, like the seeds that grow in the land of Egypt. It was like the best produce land that you could find. It was coming towards, leading up to the area called Soyar, to a place there called Soyar. So Lot says, look, I got to move somewhere. We're gonna split up a little bit. And he sees this amazingly luscious, delicious land. Rashi tells us that not so simple. There's deeper meaning here to this whole story. Is that Lot was, as he was growing, getting older or so on, he started to become a little bit corrupt. He stopped learning. He didn't like living with his uncle, because living with his uncle means he had to be observant and follow all the rules of Torah mitzvahs that his uncle was doing and be God-fearing. He really wanted out. He says he wanted a different kind of a life. And he sees in this life, he sees that he lifts up his eyes and he sees things he shouldn't see. He likes, there's a little bit of unmoral immorality going on over there in these lands where Sodom and Amorah is. And he says, you know what, I want that kind of life. But Yivchar Lot, so verse 11, Lot chooses, it's called Kikal Yard, and he says, I take the whole plain of the Jordan. Vayisa Lot Mikedem, and he traveled from the east, traveled from east to west. And a man separated from his brother. So Abraham and Lot separate from each other. He moves on. Medrash says, the deeper tradition of the oral tradition passes down, that it doesn't just mean he traveled from the east. He traveled from God. He distanced himself from not Mikedem Mikadmoinu Shalom, from God, the ancient one, meaning of the world. And he left not just Abraham, but he left his culture. He didn't want to be so observant and keeping the Torah like Abraham was doing, and be so religious, whatever, and so on. He says, you know what, I'm moving on in life. The Avram Yasha Beretz Canaan. So Abraham stayed and living in the land of Canaan, where they were at the time, where the Canaanites were at the time. I'm sorry, and the Lelite, and Lot Yasha Beretz Ba'aria Kikar, and Lot moved to the plains in the cities of Kikar, in the cities of the plain. But yeah, Latzdayim, and his tents took up place, and all the sheep and everything took up place until it got to the city of Stone. So he was kind of living on the border of the plains there, getting up to Stone, and he would bring his animals to pasture over there. But Anshe Stone, however, people of Stone, where Lot was bordering and living right next to his neighbors, were Rayim, Bechatoyim, they were evil and sinful. Rashi says evil means in their bodies, that they were immoral. They acted in very immoral ways physically. The Chatoyim, and they were sinners with their money. They would use their money to sin. They were very corrupt, bad people. Hashem, very, very, very corrupt. Rashi says, what does it mean, very corrupt to God? They knew God, they learned about it, they understood God, but they specifically intended to rebel against Hashem. They were anti-God. They were against God. They did whatever they could against Hashem in their bodies and in their mind. Hashem Amar al Avram. So now God appears to Abraham. Achri parad light, after light leaves. So as soon as light leaves, right after, God reveals himself and starts talking to Abraham. Rashi tells us something interesting here. That as long as the nephew Light was there, God didn't really want to speak to Abraham because Light was immoral. I looked in the commentaries. They explain maybe now, later on in his life, Light when he was younger, he was pure and so on, but Light started becoming corrupt and God wasn't comfortable, I guess, to have his presence revealed with Abraham when his nephew Light was hanging out with him, who was a corrupt figure. You see he's corrupt because he's moving to stone. And God appears to Abraham after Light leaves. After he leaves from him, and tells Abraham, lift up your eyes, and look and see from the place that you are. Look from where you are. Look, look everywhere, north, south, east, and west. Why do they want you to look around? You're in the land of Canaan. Because the whole land, the Sharatorah that you see, I'm going to give it to you for your descendants forever. I'm going to give the land of Israel to you forever. Hashem, it's already the second time that God is telling Avram. There's going to be many times God's going to tell Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob, where he promises the land of Israel to the descendants. Samti as haracha, and I will make your descendants. He's giving him another promise. God's telling Abraham. Kafar haaretz, like the dust of the earth. Can you count dust on the earth? It's impossible. As afar haaretz comes haracha, so too, just like you can't count the dust of the land, you think you'll be able to count your children. I promise you, I'll make you a very powerful, large nation, and I'll give them Israel forever. Let's go, walk, travel toward the land of Israel. The arka, the rachba, to its breadth and its width. Because I give it to you. Go, travel on this whole land that I'm going to give to your descendants. And Avram pitched his tent. And he went and he stayed in the plains of a man called Mamre. That was, as we know today, this is the area of Hebron. So we have Lot living in stone and Abraham living in Hebron. And he made an altar to Hashem in that very special place. And that is the end of today's Chumash. Any questions or comments on today's Chumash before we do a short overview of Tanya?
I have a question.
Yes, Ira.
Where's Saddam?
What?
Where's Saddam?
So I believe, I looked quickly before, you could Google it in Wikipedia, whatever you could see. I believe that's where, he says he's traveling, at that point, he's traveling west, right? He said he traveled from east to west. But I believe it's in where the what's it called? The Dead Sea is. In the area of the Dead Sea over there, I believe is where Sodom.
Her statue of salt. They always say they point to one thing, and they say it's there.
Yeah, that's why. There you go. Because they I don't know if that's true or not, what you're saying. But I heard somebody say that's why it's so salty over there. But and it's also, by the way, the lowest place of earth. So, you know what? Someone asked a question yesterday, and this seems to answer it maybe. Someone asked yesterday, how did we say that the Babylonia and Shinar were the lowest place of earth, and everything from the waters of the flood fell there, right? We said that in an earlier Rashi, and someone said, I thought the Dead Sea was was the lowest place on earth. And I said yesterday, well, maybe then it wasn't the lowest place, but later on it became. But this would actually say that point, prove that point, that the area changed after Sodom and Amorah. After God destroyed Sodom and Amorah, that area actually changed. So just an interesting fact on the Chumash that we're learning.
Was with
Yeah.
Sarah. You know, he took Sarah. So in 10 generations from Noah, there was so many people.
Yeah.
Pharaohs, and they had Sodom, and they had different. 10 generations, they filled up so much.
Yeah, look, I'm saying, look at any Hasidic family today. Look at it in 3 generations.
Yeah, but they were Hasidic.
What?
They had.
My grandmother has, thank God, 100 grandchildren, more, I guess, let's say, and her great-grandchildren, even before she passed away.
That's 100.
Yeah.
So
What?
It's 10,000 or 100,000. There were more people than that.
Yeah, and people live much longer. They live for hundreds of years. So they might have had many more kids than we had too. So yeah, I don't know exactly how it's a good question, but it's possible, definitely is possible. That the people had birth and they lived longer and they had more kids. Yeah, I don't know the number. It's an interesting question. I don't know the census of how many people there were, but it looked like it was growing very quickly. Hashem asked them to please have as many kids as they can to fill up the earth, to have children. God wanted them to have lots of children and to fill up the earth. That was the expectation of people at the time. Some people. Some Hasidic families take that expectation today too, but that was the Hashem asked Noah, to have children, to fill up the earth, repopulate the earth.
But you have like a pharaoh who has a society and a civilization that is basically normal. Then you have Saddam. You know what I'm saying?
It seems like Egypt was not normal. It seems like, as Eyal pointed out, it says that Abram had to hide his wife in a box because they were going to take her. It seems like Egypt was not a normal place either. We learned, if you look at the end of Parshas Noach, at the end, it tells you how all the families split up. It tells you that they came 70 nations and they split up around the world. That's where everybody lived. So there's all different kinds of cultures that were created, especially after the tower, the Babylonian tower, where Hashem spread everybody out. Everybody came 70 different cultures and nations even at that time. How big they were, I don't know. Maybe they weren't that big. Maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe they weren't that big, but at least for those time, it felt like it was big.
There were 70 nations in Canaan.
Noach split up into 70 nations. Egypt came from that, and the Persians came from that. We learned that when we were learning. Listen to the class at the end of Parshas Noach, and you'll see.
Okay.
Okay. Moving. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much for that question, commentary. Anybody else have any questions or comments before we move on to Tanya today? No, we good? Okay. Moving on to today's Tanya. So what he's going to say in today's Tanya is that a continuation from yesterday, same topic as yesterday, that there are sometimes laws in Judaism we don't know, or people don't know the law. Not just because you never opened the book and didn't learn, but you don't know the law because maybe you're confused, it's complicated. You know what I mean? Like you don't know the law because it hasn't been understood yet. And you don't know the reason for something because we're living in a dark world, which is confusion, and you haven't yet learned the language or you haven't understood it, and therefore you don't know the law. So he wants to argue that comes from impurity, the fact that we don't know it. And our job in life is to find it and rectify it. It's almost like, does anybody remember those games they had a few years ago? Maybe Evan could help us out here. Which they had these gems. You had to find it in public. Like you would take your phone, your smartphone, and you would look for like hidden stuff. I forget what it's called. And there were people going in other people's yards, whatever. What was that called? Anybody know?
It was Pokemon, I think. Pokemon.
But it was like a live game. It was like live Pokemon.
You had to go, you had a map, and you had to go to parks and search.
Yeah, Pokemon
Yeah, it was
Go.
Pokemon Go. Yeah.
Pokemon Go. Okay, good. Thanks, guys. Leah and Evan, thank you for the understanding. So like Pokemon Go.
You're welcome.
What? I'm sorry, Ira, yes, too, but we didn't. Thank you, yes. I'm sorry. I wanted to find the actual name. So Pokemon Go, you look for it, you didn't know where it was, you try and find it, then you got it, you revealed it. You got points for it. So, by the way, you know where it's a good example? I just thought of that. Bitcoin, right? So I cannot understand how Bitcoin works. You have to find a mathematic problem, right? If anybody can back me up here, and you solve the problem, you have to find a mathematic problem, you solve the problem, and that becomes the money of Bitcoin. If Brad was here, he would explain it to us probably. And Brad's not here today. But I think, right? Does anyone know if that's correct? Or somehow...
You set your computer to use your graphics card to solve a number of complex problems.
And that becomes the Bitcoin, right? That becomes the value of Bitcoin. No?
Yeah, it's like the work. Yeah, the work that your computer does has that value.
It's so I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's what right. That's what it is. So it's the same idea in halacha. So there's a law, and people don't know the law, and then you have to sit down and study it and figure it out and come to an understanding, a clarity, and all of a sudden you have the law, you understand, you had clarity. Why is this necessary? Why is this necessary to to do all this stuff in Judaism, or you don't understand the reason behind it. So you work very, very hard and you elevate it and you find that spark because the Torah was thrown, all the sparks were thrown into the world and hidden inside the world, exactly like Pokemon Go. And exactly like this Bitcoin. And you have to dig, right? What's it called? Excavating, what's it called when you dig for Bitcoin? You know the name of it? It's called like excavating or something. You're
mining.
Mining for Bitcoin, exactly. So you're mining for the, what's the Torah view? What do you do in this case? What's the reason for this mitzvah? Why? And you get clarity, boom. You've now been that person like Pokemon Go, or you discovered the mathematical problem, and now you brought it to the forefront. And that's our job. So the sparks of holiness were inside the world, and we have to elevate it and find those sparks and bring it out, and that will elevate the Torah. And we use Torah, learning hard, difficult Torah study, work very hard, and you elevate those sparks. And that's what it's saying in today's Tanya. Let's see inside today's Tanya over here. Hopefully it'll be short and quick, and we can wrap it up. So here's what he says. Havamaskil Yavin, and the person who studies will learn Inyan Hela Gadol Miyoid Mizemiyoid, a great, remarkable idea. That man nasa b'shamayim ima, what happens in heavens? When the Jew sits down and he starts diligently learning Torah, he's trying to understand it. He breaks his head and he's working. He's trying to understand it. It should make sense. And it's not just a hard work on his own effort, what he's accomplishing. He starts studying Talmud and the codifiers of Jewish law. The earlier scholars, the later scholars, he's sitting and he's studying very hard. What does he do? Before he sat down to study that piece of complicated Talmud, right? He's mining the mathematical problems. He's looking for Pokemon Go. He's trying to find the thing. Through him working really hard, diligently, opening the Talmud and studying all the commentaries, trying to figure out what's the law. He pulls out this law, Ma'klippas, from the unholiness, that were covering it, which is why no one understood the law. It didn't make sense to people. So you do a cloud wasn't known, or where no one understood it, the reason well. It was there, everybody knew about it, it didn't make sense to anyone. That the reason of something, when you understand the reason for a law, you get so clear. Also, when you have the reason behind it, that logic comes from the very high level called Chachmi Ilah, from the high wisdom of God's, who's the wisdom of Torah. That what happened, there was, right, by creation of the world, there was an explosion, almost sounds like the Big Bang idea, but a spiritually explosion, and the sparks, being such a tremendous explosion of godliness, sparks fell out all over the world, all over in the world physically, and also, which is why we do mitzvahs, and also intellectually. And all those sparks are in exile, stuck in these things. That the unholiness is boss over it, is control over it, and hiding it of this wisdom from being revealed to the world, and people don't understand it. And when you sit and deliberate and work really hard, you toil in Torah in order to understand it, to come up with what the halachic ruling is. You're doing Pokemon Go. You're excavating those bitcoins. That's what it says. But I that when there's questions, a lot of times questions are good. We love questions. But a lot of times the fact that you don't understand it, that actually comes from an unholy place. And the goal is to dig and dig and dig and to clarify and elevate it to get to the answer, in order that you can elevate the spark in the unholiness of the not knowing that comes from a place of unholiness. And that is the end. Fascinating topic in today's Tanya. Any questions or comments on today's Tanya? No? Okay. Thank you all for joining me. Have a wonderful day, and may Hashem be with you physically and spiritually, and guide us to health and happiness and good things, good clarity, which is in our class. It's so powerful what we're doing as we're describing. We're understanding Torah, we're thinking, we have questions, we're elevating the sparks and godliness that's found all over in logic in this very confused world. You see, there's a lot of confusion in the world today. Logical confusion. People don't know what's right, what's wrong. It's so much. Our job is to take Torah, dig and find, excavate Torah and find Torah where we are. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. Chazak u'baruch. We'll see you all tomorrow or tonight. Take care, everyone.